The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Cristina Bolling with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. To learn more about the Charlotte Ledger or to subscribe to one of our newsletters, go to thecharlotteledger.com. Today, we're discussing a topic that is sure to hit home for a lot of families: how parents can find support while helping their children through mental health challenges. Diane Reid Lyon has been a licensed clinical mental health counselor for more than 3 decades, and in those years, she's helped hundreds of children, teens, and adults find growth and healing while dealing with challenges like ADHD, anxiety, depression, grief, and trauma. Throughout much of her career, though, she's focused on counseling children who are considered neurodivergent, kids who are on the autism spectrum or who have attention deficit disorder, and many of whom also present with anxiety or depression. What comes up time and time again, she's found, is the stress parents are under when caring for kids with these diagnoses. So she's written a book, Caring for Yourself, Caring for Your Neurodivergent Child, to help walk parents through the journey from how to get a child tested for neurodivergence to learning how to support them. Her goal is to help parents not feel quite so alone while finding ways to help their kids. So Diane, let's start by learning a little bit about you and the nature of your practice and kind of your own little backstory.
Yeah, so I've been practicing for 30 years. I have a private practice in Matthews, North Carolina. I work with children, teens, and adults, though most of my experience was with working with children and their families. I've now branched out more in recent years, working more with adults, which I also enjoy. As you mentioned, I work with people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, and who may have neurodivergence of some sort. And that could include ADHD, learning disabilities, or autism spectrum disorder. As far as my backstory, so I'm diagnosed with ADHD myself and have neurodivergence in my family. I went through a very challenging time as a parent where I experienced burnout and was even showing some signs of trauma. And I sought out my own counseling, which helped me realize I was neglecting myself. I learned the importance of self-care. And so I really want to share with other parents the importance of taking care of yourself while you're raising your neurodivergent child.
Do you think that you would have written this book had you not gone through that experience yourself?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I think having the personal experience really has helped me bring a lot more awareness and compassion into my work when I'm working with these children and their parents.
The book is really interesting to me because it really kind of gets down into the nitty-gritty from IEPs and 504 plans. I mean, it sounds like a whole vocabulary of words and things that you have to know when you have a child who's facing those challenges. What made you kind of get into that level of detail in the book? And what have you seen in terms of what parents have to navigate when they are faced with these diagnoses for the first time?
Well, I think the most important thing that parents need to know is it's really critical to understand these diagnoses. So learn as much as you possibly can about it, because it will really help you understand your child better. And it will help you help your child understand him or herself as well. If you don't understand, then it's hard to advocate for your child. So, that's really imperative, is understanding the diagnosis. As a parent, you really do need to be a self-advocate or an advocate, for your child in school. Our schools, at least the public school system, is really geared more towards teaching the neurotypical child. And what we know about neurodivergence is these children, due to differences in their brain structure and function, need to be taught in different ways. They learn differently. They process information differently. So our schools are not always equipped to teach these kids in the ways they need to learn without having a plan in place, like a 504 plan or an IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan. These plans provide extra support to these children, whether it's accommodations in the classroom or children are pulled out for specialized instruction to support their learning. So knowing your child's diagnosis, knowing what, they're entitled to under the Individuals with Disabilities Act or Section 504 is really important so that you can advocate for their needs in school. This is really critical because when kids aren't getting what they need in school, they're not experiencing success, they're going to experience chronic stress and anxiety. You may start seeing, behaviors around going to school where, physical complaints, I don't want to go to school today, or school refusal. There can be a lot of absences and calls home to leave school. So when kids are successful, and feel successful, they're going to want to go to school. They're going to enjoy school. They're going to feel better about themselves and their learning and their abilities.
So all the while, it seems like parents are under enormous amounts of stress because not only it seems like are they trying to get the help that they're access help for their kids, but also dealing with maybe issues that might come up at home, right?
Absolutely. So parenting is stressful anyways, right? All parents experience stress. But when you have a child with neurodivergence who, maybe needs a lot more support with things like homework, or maybe they have sensory issues, or they have speech language issues, or fine motor issues, they may be going to multiple professionals to help with some of these delays in their development. So as a parent, you are taking them to multiple professionals sometimes in the course of a week on top of their extracurricular activities. You might be managing their medications and refills and homework meltdowns. So the stress on parents who are parenting children with neurodivergence is much greater. And so it leaves these parents at greater risk for burnout.
You talk about how it can be such a lonely time in a parent's life. And I mean, I just see, with social media, you're seeing everybody's family looks perfect, and meanwhile, parents are dealing with, it sounds like really could be serious behavior issues, or just their children aren't having necessarily the experiences that other kids are having. What's that like for parents in terms of that loneliness that they might feel?
Oh, that's such an important question. I interviewed parents for my book, and I heard a lot of these same things. And one of the biggest things I heard a lot of the times was they felt alone. I think when you have these kids, there is a tendency sometimes to withdraw and to isolate, because maybe they do have behaviors that you don't want to have to deal with out in public, or you fear judgment from other parents. So sometimes parents do isolate. Sometimes their kids are the ones that are not being invited by other parents or kids to do things. And so there may be, rejection that they feel or that you even might feel. So those experiences can leave parents feeling very alone and lonely. The great news is you're not alone. If you are one of these parents, there are a lot of parents out there having some of the same challenges you are, and it's so important to connect with them. The great news is there are a lot of support groups online and on Facebook that you can join and be a part of. Those didn't exist when I was in the thick of it. So, you're fortunate if you're raising your kids today that there is support out there, and it's so important and critical to connect with these parents so that you can realize, I'm not alone. Some of these challenges I'm facing are normal given the child I have, and it can be very validating for parents to hear other parents are struggling too.
What advice would you give family or friends of parents who might be struggling? How can they support them?
Well, holidays are coming and my book might make a great gift, but I would say educate yourself. If your grandchild has ADHD or is on the spectrum, or your sister's kid, learn as much as you can about that so that you can be more understanding and empathic. Be direct with them. Ask, what can I do to help and support you? What do you need from me? Let them vent. Sometimes we all just need to vent and express our frustrations. When you're listening, try not to fix or offer advice. Just listen and empathize. I think most importantly, know that, these parents are doing the best they can with the knowledge and the skills they have. If you're aware of resources they may not be aware of, you can certainly refer them to those resources. You don't have to agree with their parenting style to support them in how they choose to parent. And in fact, these kids need to be parented differently than neurotypical kids, as they often don't learn from traditional parenting approaches in the same way. So parents might need to pick their battles. They might need to choose to ignore behaviors. They might not have the energy to deal with a behavior in the moment due to their own exhaustion or burnout. And, they may also choose to not respond in the moment as they don't want to lose their cool, or they want to be more thoughtful of their response. So they might choose to address behavior at a later time. So, I think there's a lot of judgment out there that these parents experience from the world, and they can feel a lot of blame for their child's behaviors. They're often, not at fault for these behaviors. The behaviors are a result more of how this child is wired, how their brain works. So I think that's really important for other people to know and understand. Also, I think one of the big things you can do to support is to offer to give these parents a break. Offer to take their kids for an hour or two for a day or a weekend. These parents really do need breaks.
So kind of like respite care for these parents, like you would for maybe a child that had a physical diagnosis like a cancer or something like that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that because, these disabilities, ADHD, autism, aren't always obvious. When we look at a person, they're considered invisible disabilities. And so, we tend to be much more compassionate when we can see a disability. We may not always understand why somebody's acting a certain way or, having a meltdown, and we, think human nature might be to judge. But I think understand there may be more going on than, we realize. And so, think about that. Think that, there may be something more going on with this child or this parent when you observe an interaction that, isn't going well.
And do you think that what are some things that as a society we might be able to do to support families through this?
Ooh, that's a big question. In other cultures and societies, neurodivergence is not identified in the same way it is in our culture. People with neurodivergence, just kind of weave into the fabric of their society. Our culture, unfortunately, pathologizes neurodivergence. We give labels like ADHD, learning disability, autism spectrum. So I think the important thing in our culture to realize is, these people really add value to our culture, to our society. They have a lot of really special abilities, which myself and others in the field might refer to as superpowers. They have, the ability to often think outside the box. They are often highly creative, highly intelligent, innovators in their field. There are a lot of very well-known people with neurodivergence, like Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, U.S. presidents like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Abe Lincoln, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Justin Timberlake, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps. So, when we start mentioning these names, and I mention these names to kids and parents to help them, think big. This is big. This is, your child has incredible potential and incredible abilities. So we want to recognize that too. And I think it's really important to foster their abilities and not just focus on their deficits.
You talk about how you were diagnosed with ADHD at age 50. And it's so interesting to learn about how when many parents learn their kids are neurodivergent, they find that they are also. And I'm wondering, how have you seen that play out in families, maybe some of the families that you've helped?
Yeah, that's not an uncommon experience either. I think when I was growing up, there was more stigma. We didn't know as much. There was less support services available. So a lot of parents today, are kind of discovering their own neurodivergence by learning first that their child has neurodivergence. It does tend to run in families. So, there are more adults being diagnosed for this reason.
I know that you talk about sometimes it can bring up things in parents, like they might remember some traumas or some, challenges that they faced related to that, and it might project onto their kids. Is that something that you see happen sometimes?
Yeah. So, sometimes, what I'll say is a lot of people with a neurodivergence face a lot more negative feedback in their life from parents, teachers, family members, friends, employers. And all of that negative input can take a toll on a person's self-esteem. And can lend to, chronic stress or anticipated anxiety in certain situations, and maybe even some traumas. We do know that neurodivergent individuals are more at risk for developing what we call complex PTSD. They're more at risk for being bullied, So there may be trauma that we've experienced as a child that if we haven't really dealt with, when our child sometimes reaches the age we were when that trauma happened, sometimes we can have some of those memories emerge, maybe not even on a conscious level, that come up and that lend us to feeling more anxious about our child, going off to middle school or doing something that somehow reminds us of our trauma that we had. And sometimes that can get projected onto our child if we're not mindful and aware of that. So, it's important to be mindful of that. And if you're aware of any trauma from your past that could be coming into play as you're parenting, to get professional help in dealing that and working that through, that, is really important, because you want to be able to show up as the best parent you can be for your child. And so caring for yourself along the way, managing your own emotions in response to your child's behaviors, in response to things that might be getting triggered within you, is really important.
We talked a little bit ago about burnout, and I'm wondering if you can go a little bit more into detail about how parents can look for those signs of burnout. Do you know when it's happening? Can you see it creeping up? What do you do when you're in that position or you are about to be in that position?
Yeah, so it's real. Some of us may have felt burned out in a job before, right? Well, parenting is a job. And so we can certainly, get to a place of burnout in our jobs as parents as well. And it can sneak up on us. It can be gradual. But some of the signs to look for might be exhaustion, lacking energy, maybe not being as productive and getting things done, having a negative outlook, not enjoying your role as a parent as much, or not enjoying things you typically enjoy, irritability, maybe being less patient or yelling more, having difficulty concentrating or sleeping, weight gain or weight loss, and maybe even engaging in maladaptive behaviors or coping skills like turning more to alcohol or online shopping, things like that.
So what can people do to recover from that?
Well, I think self-care is critical in preventing burnout. And as part of self-care, I think I always start with the basics with people in terms of mind, body, and spirit. So I think of self-care in holistic terms. Am I taking care of my mind? What might I do to take care of my mind? Well, making sure that I'm thinking in positive ways, maybe doing things like journaling so that I can kind of get my thoughts and feelings out, maybe talking to a therapist or practicing mindfulness in terms of our body, the basics like, am I eating enough? Am I getting all my meals in and eating nutritious foods? Am I exercising? Am I getting adequate sleep? And, there are certainly additional ways we can practice self-care for our bodies, whether it's getting massages or, having a face care routine, taking hot baths, things like that. And spiritual self-care is going to, of course, be different for each individual depending on their religious or their spiritual beliefs. It could, for some people, be prayer. Other people, it could be spending time in nature or, going to an energy healer. So I think of self-care in those terms. And I also think of self-care in terms of micro self-care and macro self-care. So, a lot of parents I'll hear say, I don't have time to take care of myself. Well, it's pretty critical that you make time. And it doesn't have to be in big ways. It could be a 10-minute break in your day where you get up and you stretch, or you eat lunch outside, or you go for a walk. So we can practice self-care in small ways, or we can certainly do it in bigger ways. Sometimes, making sure you're having radical fun, like going whitewater rafting or to the Whitewater Center, or going on a retreat, having a weekend away. I know that when I was burned out, I on occasion would go to a hotel and just spend the night by myself and have a break from everybody. And it was incredibly helpful. So self-care is critical in preventing burnout. And I think it's also critical in terms of preventing, but also in recovering from burnout as well. The other things I tell people is take time to get organized, delegate tasks as you're able to, ask for and hire help as needed, engage in problem solving, take time to stop and think, like, what can I do about this? Sometimes when you're in the midst of the struggle, you're just in survival mode. And so you're not even taking time to stop and think about, okay, what's the solution for this problem I'm having? Making sure you have good boundaries for yourself and with others, seeking support, getting breaks. And as I mentioned, self-care is critical.
Any other tips for how parents can find a community of parents that can help them through this? How do you begin a search, maybe even online, or for what resources might be in your city?
Yeah. So if you go to Facebook, there are a number of Facebook groups. Just do a search on Facebook for ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, parenting, and, there's several that pop up. And, I'm amazed every day when I am just reading through some people's posts, just how much, the struggle is real. And I actually had a parent say that. I think I quote that in my book. The struggle is real. And, parents really, really are out there struggling, and they do get a lot of support from others in these groups. So seek those groups out.
So back to your book, how can people find it who might want to read it and buy it?
So I will actually be at Park Road Books in Charlotte on Saturday, October 12th at 11 a.m. for a book signing. So you can come to the book signing and purchase it there. You can purchase it on my website, www.caringforyourselfbook.com, or it's also available on Amazon, of course.
Right. Well, Diane, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate all your insights and just, tips. And I think that it will be a big help to families who are going through this. I know that it's on the hearts and minds of so many people, and it's hard sometimes as parents to know where to turn, especially in a journey like this. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Cristina. I really appreciate being invited on the show.
That's it for today. The Charlotte Ledger podcast is produced by Lindsey Banks. For more information about the Charlotte Ledger, go to thecharlotteledger.com.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.